ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح المؤمنون صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم الأمين قال الله تبارك وتعالى في شان حبيبه مخبرا وآمرا إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وأصحاب سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك وأصحابك يا سيدي يا حبيب الله باب جبریل کے پہلو میں ذرا دھیرے سے باب جبریل کے پہلو میں ذرا دھیرے سے فخر جبریل کو یوں کہتے ہوئے پایا گیا فخر جبریل کو یوں کہتے ہوئے پایا گیا اپنی پلکوں most gracious and generous host, respected audience. I don't wish to stand before you and be a barrier between you and the honorable guests that we have with us for too long. I've been requested to say a few things in English, and I'm going to sort of say something as a continuation of what Allama Umar Hayat Qadri Sahib was saying before. And the hadith, the last and final hadith that he mentioned about the 6 points that you need to adopt within yourself. The Prophet ﷺ said, give me guarantee of 6 things and I will guarantee you Jannah. I'm sure it's not been that long. I won't test your memories though, but I'm sure you'll remember those 6 things. And so I'm going to give you, inshallah, within the space of a few minutes, I'm going to give you a Quranic perspective on this guarantee. So that was a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. I'm going to give you a Quranic perspective of this guarantee. Before I move on, I just want to say that, alhamdulillah, we are gathered here to commemorate the life and the works of a great individual. And there's nothing greater when commemorating somebody's life than looking at the legacy that they've left behind. And alhamdulillah, as Allama Sahib was saying before me, the note that he finished on, that this is it's a proud moment, not just for the family, not just for Makkah Masjid in Leeds, but for the entire Sunni community that alhamdulillah we have a voice representing us and telling the wider community and the world out there what the true meaning of Islam and the true character of a mu'min and a believer should be. And so alhamdulillah we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He preserve Qari Sahib and protect him from all calamities and afflictions, and that may he do this for a long time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him a lifetime of service for his deen. This is extremely important. It's a very difficult task to do in a time when you're speaking, in particular in the media, where every single word, and dare I say every single letter that you utter from your mouths will have a profound impact. To actually be able to stand and speak confidently and represent such a large group is something very much commendable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward Qari Sahib abundantly for this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the means and the provisions to bring forth many others who can follow in his footsteps. As the one thing that we can never have too many of is ambassadors and people representing Islam in the true meaning of Islam. And so this is the legacy that's been left behind, the legacy of promoting the true image of Islam. And that tells you, that summarizes for you the life of this great gentleman, that the legacy he's left behind is that of preservation of the true image of Islam. And that's an amazing legacy to leave behind. And so continuing from there, that legacy, preserving the true image of Islam. But what is the true image and what is the true identity of Islam? We say that Qari Sahib represents us as a Sunni community. But what is our identity as a Sunni community? I think in many respects we have gone very far away from the true teachings of the Quran. We don't need to go much further than the Quran. And we measure, this Surah Al-Mu'minun. I recited the opening verse of the surah. But something that I will implore you to do, to go away, and in fact to come to Qari Sahib, ask him to explain to you, and go and study and research the first 11 verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun. What are they? They are exactly that same guarantee that Allama Sahib was talking about, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in these verses, he says that he will guarantee Jannah, not just Jannah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Jannatul Firdaus. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that these people who follow in these things, in the criteria that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ulaika humul warithun. They are inheritors. The inheritors of what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they are the inheritors, alladhina yarithun al-firdaus. They are those people who will inherit al-firdaus, Jannatul Firdaus. But the fact is, one thing that I want to bring to your attention, you heard Allama Sahib talking about the character of a believer, the akhlaq of a believer, the morals and conduct, the ethics, the character, however you want to translate that word, and whether you want to put all of those words together under this banner of akhlaq, because you can. What are they? What are the morals, the ethics, the character, the conduct of a believer and a mu'min? And you've heard, I'm sure, many of you will have heard this hadith. Give me some gesture, raise your hand or nod your heads or something, or say subhanallah. If you've heard this hadith, because I'm sure many of you will have. Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was asked by somebody what was the khuluq, what was the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did she reply? She said, Kana khuluquhul Quran. Yes, you've heard this hadith. That the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the khuluq. His character was the Quran. And he was a walking, talking embodiment of the teachings and values of the Quran. This is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now that, I'm pretty sure of that, majority of you, if not all of you, will have heard that hadith. But this hadith does not finish there. And so how many of you actually heard the lengthier narration, the narration which is more complete, which actually continues on from there? The continuation of this hadith, it doesn't end there. Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa al-Mu'mineen radiallahu ta'ala anha did not just say Kana khuluquhul Quran. She said his conduct was the Quran, but then she recited the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun. She said this was his character. Quran teaches, and this is what the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. And there's some key points that are mentioned within that. The very first thing, after mentioning the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in reciting these verses, the very first verse it says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. The believers have prospered, the believers have succeeded. This is your identity. What do you know about your identity? The guarantee of not just Jannah, Jannatul Firdaus. And the Prophet ﷺ said, ask Allah, whenever you ask Allah for Jannah, ask Him for Jannatul Firdaus. What is Jannatul Firdaus? The Prophet ﷺ explained. He said that Jannah has 100 levels. In between each level, the distance is the distance between the heavens and the earth. And the greatest and highest of all those levels, from where all the rivers and streams of Jannah begin, where they start from, where the head of where the fountain is, that is Jannatul Firdaus. And the Prophet ﷺ told us to ask for that. You're being guaranteed that. Your identity is being told to you in a time when we're suffering an identity crisis. What should your identity be? And even standards of prosperity and success. We think that if we achieve a good degree, and alhamdulillah, academia is something that is firmly rooted within Islam. The very first revelation began with the word Iqra and read. So there's no doubting the importance of academia and of learning. But at the same time, is it just sufficient? Is this your gauge and your criteria for success? Is it that you have a good education, you have a good degree, you have a good job, you're married, you have a home, you have children? Is that it? Have you succeeded? If that is the criteria of success, then I tell you the most successful people in the time of the Prophet ﷺ were Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab. If that's your only gauge for success, this is not the sole criteria and gauge for success. True success is eternal success. And in order to achieve eternal success, what do you need to do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, He says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. It is the believers who have attained true and lasting and eternal success. And now, I'm going to finish up in the next couple of minutes. Had I time, we could talk about what al-mu'minun means, what iman actually is, what it means to be a true believer. But the fact is, I have very limited time, so I want to move on. I want to at least give you the bare criteria, and then, inshallah, at some point, you can ask Qari Sahib to elaborate on this for you, and to explain to you in detail what that criteria actually is. But the first thing, I want to recite these verses to you and just translate them to you. So at least you know what the criteria actually is. And then you can follow up on that and you can check that. And you can tally it. If you remember the hadith that Allama Sahib was saying, tally it and see how the Prophet ﷺ's hadith, how it actually is supported by this verse of the Quran, and how it complements this verse of the Quran, or these verses of the Quran. The first thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. These are those people who adopt khushu and sincerity in their salah. But not just in salah. Khushu has its own definition. And the sincerity has its own definition and requirements. What is our level of sincerity within our salah, within our prayers? Our recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our key to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How often and how frequently do we utilize this key? And Sayyidina Urwa radiallahu ta'ala, it's narrated about him. If you want an example of khushu, that he was injured during a battle. One of his limbs was injured. And due to it becoming infected, it had to be amputated. And the only time they could find to amputate his limb without causing him pain was when it was recommended that amputate that limb while he's praying salah. Can you imagine that? The slightest noise distracts us. He's praying salah and his limb is amputated and he did not flinch, he did not realize. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. Those who stay away from things that are love. What is love? The ulama define love as any statement that is useless. anything that is useless. What does the Prophet ﷺ say? Min husn al-Islami, min husn Islam, from amongst the beauties of the Islam, of the beauty of Iman is what? From the beauty of the belief, the Islam of a believer, tarkuhu ma la yani, leaving that which does not concern me. At this moment in time, we are very happy to indulge in that which does not concern us, and yet we're neglecting entirely that which concerns us individually and as a community. We're neglecting our individual prosperity, our success, and our success as a community. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Those who don't just look after themselves. That example of Khaja Mahbub Ilahi Rahmatullahi Ta'ala alayhi that we've given, doesn't want to eat, right? Because he's seen other people outside who are suffering. They're so poor, they don't have food, so he doesn't want to eat. It's not just, about yourself. Those who give zakat. We could talk about how zakat stems from the word purity, the different types of purification, and how this wealth actually, giving this away, will purify your wealth, the barakah and blessing that it brings, but also the sentiments of caring for others that go behind it. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. Those who protect their shame, their modesty. Those who protect their honor and dignity. This is something that you heard before. And how except إِلَّا عَلَىٰ أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. Except they only indulge in their carnal desires with their wives. Those that are halal for them. Allah's given us halal means. This is one of these, this is the thing. I am Imam of Golden Mosque in Rochdale, and as you know, Rochdale in the modern times, unfortunately, hasn't been blessed with the best reputation. And these issues of grooming, they are very, very close to home for me. Something that I have to deal with and have to look into. And this is something that I have to address my congregation about. But one of the things where, those people who are being arrested, many of them now in their 40s, 50s, 60s even. Where was our community when they were committing those crimes? I'll be first to stand up and say, we had a moral, communal and civic responsibility to report those people at that time. Had we done our civic responsibility when it was time for us to do it, we would not have seen this day today. So it's not just about protecting your modesty. There's a message of civic responsibilities within that. And then, I just want to say one thing before moving quickly on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, except that they marry, they take wives, they adopt a halal means. But then it also mentions about slaves. And this is a question that's often asked. This is a completely separate speech on its own. The services that Islam rendered in abolishing slavery. Right? You look at the American African slave trade, that only ended very, very recently. Right? But at the time, 1400 years ago, the psychological shackles and barriers that were broken by Islam is what laid down the foundation to ending slavery. At a time when people considered slaves worse than objects and possessions, the Prophet ﷺ said, feed them what you eat yourself, clothe them how you clothe yourself. And you saw slave and master standing next to each other in salah. This was at a time when they were not permitted to speak, even look at their masters without permission. And the general, our ulama, our great ulama and scholars of the modern times, Ulam Rasul Sayyidi Sahib, rahimahullah ta'ala, he writes about this. He says that in a modern time, slavery was permitted then because it was customary for non-Muslims to take our prisoners and make them into slaves. And therefore, as a form of retaliation, it was accepted. But now that this custom has been abolished throughout all communities, this will not be permitted in Islam. This is not permitted in Islam. Very clearly and categorically, because people often use this as an issue. They use these verses as an issue. And then just وَالَّذِينَ amongst those conditions, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ, those who are mindful of their amana, things that are entrusted to them. This is not just about money, as Allama Sahib was saying, your life is entrusted to you. The Prophet ﷺ said, a person will not move on the Day of Judgment until he's been asked 4 questions. What did you do with your life? In particular, what did you do with your youth? He will not move from his place until he's answered that. Where did you earn your wealth from? What did you use it on? You will not be able to move from your position until you have answered those questions. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. And then the previous one was khushu. Now Allah says that they are protective of their prayers. They pray on time and they pray continuously. أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْوَارِثُونَ. These are the inheritors. These are your responsibilities. These are your duties. You don't need to go far away. They are inheritors of what? They are inheritors of Jannatul Firdaus. This is the legacy that has been left behind, promoting the true identity of a Muslim, showing us what a Muslim practically and also in the form of teachings and propagating, showing us what what the character of a mu'min and a believer should be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us and give us the tawfiq to understand and act upon this criteria and make us from amongst the inheritors of Jannatul Firdaus. Wa akhiru da'wana.